Let me tell you what happened the Tuesday morning my whole life became something I actually recognized as mine. I was standing in my kitchen in Atlanta, in bare feet on a cold tile floor, holding a cup of coffee I had not taken a single sip of yet. The coffee was going cold. I knew it was going cold. I did not care, because I was looking out the window at the backyard, at the hydrangeas I had planted along the fence line the previous spring. They were doing well. I had not expected them to do well. I am not a gardener. I bought them on a Saturday because the garden center was having a sale, and the blue of those flowers was the exact shade of blue I love most in this world. And I thought, why not? I thought that a lot these days. Why not? I could do that now. The doorbell rang at 7:14 in the morning. You need to understand what I was feeling when I heard it, because it was not what you might expect. I was not startled. I was not annoyed. I felt something land in my stomach, heavy and still, the way a stone sinks in water. I already knew. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I set my coffee cup down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you want to keep your hands from shaking, and I did not move toward the front door. I moved to the window instead. She was standing on my porch in a gray coat that did not fit her right anymore. She had lost weight in a way that looked like worry, not intention. Her hair was done, which told me she had made an effort, which told me she needed something. She had a small bag at her feet, like she was planning to come inside and stay a while. She was looking at the door. She rang again. My mother had not seen me in 11 years. I want you to sit with that number for a second. 11 years. My mother was standing on the porch of a house she had never visited, in a city I had moved to on my own, ringing a doorbell at 7:14 in the morning, and I stood at my window and watched her, and I did not move. The coffee finished going cold. She rang a third time, then a fourth. Then she took her phone out, and I watched her dial, and my phone lit up on the kitchen counter with her name on the screen, a name I had kept in my contacts not out of hope, but out of habit, the way you keep an old scar. Not because you love it, but because it is there. I watched the screen light up and go dark, light up and go dark. I picked up my coffee cup. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I listened to the sound of her down there, ringing, waiting, not understanding yet that this time no one was going to open the door. I am going to tell you the whole story, all of it, from the beginning, so you understand why I did what I did, and why I do not feel one moment of regret about any of it. I am going to tell you about Charlotte. I am going to tell you about Darnell. I am going to tell you about the 6 people who knocked on my door in a 6-week period and did not get a single one of their calls returned. And I am going to tell you how I sat in an attorney's office on a Thursday afternoon and signed papers that gave me back every piece of myself I had loaned out over the years. But first, I need to tell you who I was before any of this, because that matters. That is the part people always skip over when they tell these kinds of stories. They jump to the comeback. They jump to the win. They don't tell you about the parking lot in Charlotte where a 22-year-old woman stood with $12 in her pocket and watched her family drive away laughing. I was that woman. And what happened next is the reason I could stand at a window on a Tuesday morning at 37 years old and watch my mother ring a bell she was never going to get answered. My name is Renee Carter. I used to be Renee Okafor before I changed it after the divorce. I am a property developer. I own 14 units across Atlanta and 2 commercial properties in Decatur. I have a best friend named Nadine who drinks good wine and tells me the truth. A business partner named Jerome, who has never once let me down, and a house with hydrangeas along the back fence. None of it came from anyone in my family. None of it came from my ex-husband. Every single thing I have, I built with my own 2 hands, with my own money, and with the kind of stubbornness that only grows in a person after they have been told, clearly and with laughter, that they are worth nothing. Let me tell you what happened. I remember the day because it was a Sunday in October, and the leaves were doing that thing they do in the Carolinas where the whole world looks like it is on fire in the best way. It was a beautiful day. You should know that. It was the kind of day that belonged in a movie, and what happened in it did not belong in any movie I would ever choose to watch. We had driven up from Columbia, South Carolina for my cousin Priscilla's birthday. She had wanted to spend the weekend in Charlotte, which meant a hotel for 2 nights, which meant my mother, my Uncle Terrence, my aunt before she and Terrence split, and 4 cousins including Priscilla, all piling into 2 cars and making a whole event of it. I was invited late, as an afterthought, which was normal. I was the youngest of the adults and the one who did not have a loud enough voice to take up space in that family. I had learned not to try. The trip itself was fine. Fine the way things are fine when you are holding yourself small and quiet. We ate at a restaurant on Saturday night where Priscilla ordered for the table without asking anyone, and my uncle told 3 long stories that had nothing to do with the birthday. My mother laughed at all of them. She always laughed at Terrence's stories. He was the older brother, and she had spent her life making sure he knew she thought he was wonderful. Sunday morning, we checked out of the hotel and went to a big outdoor market downtown. It was crowded, the way those places always are on October Sundays. We walked around for 2 hours. At some point, I went into a bookstore at one end of the market, because there was a book in the window I had been wanting to read for months. And when I came out 12 minutes later, everyone was gone. I am going to say that again, because I want you to feel it the way I felt it. I came out of the bookstore with a $10 book in my hand, and the entire group was gone. Both cars, gone. My bag, which had my charger and my wallet, was in the trunk of my mother's car. I had my phone, which was at 14% battery, the book I just bought, and 2 crumpled dollars in my jacket pocket. The 10 I had spent on the book had been all the cash I brought because I was 22 and between paychecks, and I had not planned on needing money beyond that. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her I was still at the market. I told her I had come out of the bookstore and they were gone. I was keeping my voice calm because I did not want to be dramatic, and I had learned very early in that family that drama was only allowed if you were Priscilla or Terrence. And my mother said, and I want you to hear this exactly as she said it, "Renee, you're always lagging behind. It's time you figured out how to keep up on your own. Think of it as a little challenge. You'll be fine." I heard laughter in the background. Not one person, several people. I said, "Mama, I don't have my wallet. It's in your trunk." She said, "You're a grown woman. Figure it out." And she hung up. I stood in that parking lot for I don't know how long. Long enough for the people around me to thin out and the afternoon light to start shifting. I had 14% battery and $2. The book in my hand felt ridiculous. I remember thinking I should put it down somewhere, give it to someone, because it felt like the most useless thing in the world to be holding. And then I thought, no, I bought it. It is mine. I held on to it. I called Nadine. She was in Columbia, 4 hours away, and she did not hesitate for a single second. She said, "Stay exactly where you are. I am calling you a ride, and I am sending you $50 through the app right now." She said, "Renee, listen to me. This is not about you. This has never been about you." She stayed on the phone with me while the battery ticked down to 4%, and the ride she sent pulled up to the curb. I made it to a bus station. Nadine paid for my ticket home. I sat on that bus for 3.5 hours, and I did not cry. I read my book. I read every single page of it. What I did not do, what I made a decision not to do on that bus, was spend the next days or weeks waiting for my mother to call and apologize. I knew she was not going to. She thought she had done something good. She thought she had taught me a lesson. That family had always thought that embarrassing me was the same as educating me. When I got back to Columbia, I had exactly 1 week left on the lease of the apartment I shared with a roommate who was moving to Florida. I had a job at a property management company that paid me $11 an hour to answer phones and file paperwork. I had no savings to speak of. I had the book Nadine had sent me money for, plus the $2 I never spent. I thought about all the times I had sat at family dinners and said nothing when they told the jokes about me. The useless one. That was what they called me when they thought I wasn't listening, and sometimes when they were sure I was. Useless Renee. Always in a corner, always with a book, always quiet. I thought about all of that and I made a decision. I was going to leave South Carolina. I was going to go somewhere no one in that family knew my daily movements. I was going to stop being the person they called when they needed a quiet audience and stop calling when they actually wanted to spend time with someone. I was going to do something. I did not know what yet, but I knew it was going to be mine. You need to understand what I was working with when I got to Atlanta. It was November, 7 weeks after Charlotte. I had saved $1,100 from 2 months of double shifts, one at the property management office and one at a hotel front desk on weekends. I had a duffel bag, a box of books, and the phone I had paid off 6 months before. I had a name of a church in a neighborhood in Atlanta that a woman at the hotel desk had told me rented out a room in their annex building for $300 a month to working people who needed a start. That room was exactly what you are imagining. One window, a bed that was not mine but was clean, a hot plate, a shared bathroom at the end of the hall. I lived in that room for 8 months. I did not hate it. I want to be clear about that. I did not feel sorry for myself in that room. I felt safe in a way I had not felt in a long time, because no one in that building knew my family. No one had a name for me. No one was watching to see when I would fail. I got a job at a real estate office in Midtown within 2 weeks of arriving, not as an agent, as a receptionist and administrative assistant, same as before, same $11 an hour kind of work. But this time I was paying attention differently. I was watching how deals moved. I was watching how properties got listed and how they got sold, and who made the money and who did the paperwork, and what the difference was between those two kinds of people. I started studying for my real estate license 4 months in. I studied at the little table in my room on the hot plate side, the table that was barely bigger than a cutting board. I studied before my shift and after it. I studied on Sundays when I could have been doing other things. I took the exam on a Saturday morning in April, 8 months after I arrived in Atlanta, wearing my blue blazer that I had pressed the night before, and I passed on the first try. Nadine called me that afternoon. She was still in Columbia, but we talked 3 times a week, and she had been asking me every Sunday for 8 months if I had registered for the exam yet. When I told her I passed, she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Renee, I knew it. I knew you the whole time." I started selling part-time out of that same Midtown office while still doing admin work. My first sale was a 2-bedroom condo in Buckhead that the sellers had been sitting on for 6 months because the listing photos were terrible. I retook the photos myself with my phone, got the listing cleaned up, and had an offer in 3 weeks. My commission was $4,000. I stared at that check for a long time before I deposited it. Over the next 2 years, I moved out of the church annex room, into an apartment, then into a better apartment. I moved from selling to investing. I bought my first property at 25 with a small loan and a lot of spreadsheets and a property manager named Jerome Banks, who I found through the real estate office and who turned out to be the most reliable business partner I have ever had. Jerome is the kind of man who calls when he says he will call, who spots a problem before it becomes a crisis, and who has never once pretended to know something he doesn't. We have been working together for 12 years. By the time I was 28, I had 4 units. By 31, 8. By 35, 14 units and the 2 commercial properties in Decatur. My mother called me exactly twice in those years, once when my aunt died, and once when Priscilla was getting married and needed money for the wedding. I sent flowers to the funeral. I sent nothing for the wedding. Both times my mother called, she asked about money within the first 3 minutes of the conversation. Both times I got off the phone and sat with the feeling that came after, that particular feeling of being seen as a resource rather than a person, and I made notes. Not actual notes, but the kind of notes you keep in your body, the kind that tell you what is real even when you want to believe something different. I want you to know something about those years. They were not miserable. That is not what this story is. Those years were some of the best I have ever had. I was making something out of nothing. I was learning every single day. I was living in a city that did not know my old name for me. I cooked dinner on real burners. I planted things. I read every book I wanted to read. I had Nadine on the phone 3 times a week, and once she moved to Atlanta in my 3rd year, I had her across a dinner table too. The loneliness was real. I will not lie about that. There were nights I drove home from a long day and sat in my car in the parking deck because I did not want to walk into a quiet apartment yet. There were holidays I spent alone that I did not want to spend alone. There was a particular Sunday in December when I was 26 that was the worst day I can remember, for reasons I couldn't even name clearly, just a kind of gray weight that sat on me from morning until I finally fell asleep. But here is the thing about building something from nothing. Every day that you do it, you get a little more solid, a little more sure, a little harder to shake. By the time I was 30, I was not the woman in the Charlotte parking lot anymore. I was something else. Someone I had made on purpose. That was the person Darnell Carter met at a rooftop party in September, when I was 30 years old and wearing a cobalt blue dress that I had bought because it was the exact color of those hydrangeas I hadn't planted yet. I need to be honest with you about Darnell, because it would be easy to make him a cartoon of a bad husband, and the truth is more complicated than that. The truth is that I loved him. The truth is that he was funny, and he was warm, and he knew how to make a room feel lighter just by walking into it. The truth is that there were years of our marriage that were genuinely good. I met him at a rooftop party that one of Jerome's contacts was throwing in September. Darnell was standing by the edge of the roof with a drink in his hand, looking out at the city like he was having a conversation with it. He was wearing a green button-down shirt that someone had told him looked good on him, and they were not wrong. When we started talking, I found out he did sales for a tech company, that he had grown up in Memphis, that he had a younger sister he clearly adored, and that he thought the best thing about Atlanta was that it had enough city to disappear into when you needed to think. I understood that immediately. It was the first thing he said that I recognized as true in my bones. We dated for 2 years. He met Nadine, who looked at him with the careful eyes she uses when she is forming an opinion she is not going to share until she is sure. He met Jerome, who shook his hand and said nothing useful or useless about him afterward, which was Jerome's way of not interfering. He did not meet my family because I had not told him much about my family, and he did not push. We got married when I was 32, at a small ceremony in a garden in Decatur. Nadine was my maid of honor. I wore a deep red dress because I have never been the white dress kind of woman, and Darnell thought that was the best decision I had ever made. We danced to a song we had argued about for 3 weeks and finally agreed on at 11 o'clock at night in my kitchen while we were both laughing. The first 2 years of the marriage were the good years. We had a system. I worked long hours, and so did he, and we met in the middle of it, and it worked. He was proud of what I had built. He told people about my properties with a kind of excitement that felt genuine, and for a while I believed it was. The shift came in year 3, and it was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was the kind of shift you feel before you can name it. Darnell lost his job in March of our 3rd year. The tech company restructured, and his whole department went. He was home for 4 months before he found new work, and those 4 months changed something. He started making comments about my hours, small ones at first, easy to brush past, then larger ones. He started saying we when he talked about the properties, in a way he hadn't before, a possessive we that included him in things he had not been part of building. He started having opinions about deals I had already closed, retroactive opinions, delivered in a tone that suggested I should have consulted him. I noticed it. I filed it. I am not a person who fights about things I am still figuring out. I go quiet first. I watch. I wait until I understand what I am actually looking at. Darnell read my quiet as comfort. He thought my silence meant he was not crossing any lines. He was wrong. He found new work in month 5, a sales role at a different company, and things settled again. I told myself the rough patch had passed. I am not proud of that. I wanted it to have passed, so I let myself believe it had. The signs I missed, or told myself I was misreading. He started going to the gym in the evenings instead of the mornings, which was a small thing and also was not a small thing. He started being careful about his phone in a way he had not been before. Not obvious careful, not movie careful, where someone flips a phone over when you walk in the room. Careful in a slower way, a habit of keeping it in his pocket, a habit of stepping out to take calls. I noticed all of it. I filed all of it. And then one Thursday afternoon in November of our 6th year, I stopped filing and started looking. I want to be clear about how I found out because people always want to know. They want a dramatic story. They want something they can picture. What I have for them is a Thursday afternoon and a credit card statement. Darnell had added me to one of his cards 2 years into the marriage, a card I never used, but that showed up in the mail every month. I had started keeping those statements, not because I was suspicious, but because I am the kind of person who keeps financial documents. It is not exciting, it is just who I am. In November, I sat down on a Thursday afternoon to go through a stack of mail I had let pile up, and I pulled out 3 months of Darnell's card statements in a row. I read them the way I read a property inspection report, carefully, looking for patterns. What I found was a pattern. The same restaurant, twice a month, always on a Tuesday evening. A hotel in Buckhead, twice in 3 months. A jewelry store in Midtown in August, on a day Darnell had told me he was in a sales conference across town. A spa in Sandy Springs, which Darnell had definitely not visited for himself. I sat at my kitchen table with those 3 statements in front of me for about 20 minutes. I was not crying. I was not shaking. I was thinking. I thought about the gym schedule change. I thought about the phone in the pocket. I thought about the way he had started saying we about things that were mine. I thought about 100 small things I had noticed and filed and told myself I was probably wrong about, and I understood that I had not been wrong about any of them. I called Nadine. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That was why I loved Nadine. She did not tell me what I should feel. She did not fill the silence with her own reaction. She asked me what I wanted. I said, "I want to know exactly what I am dealing with before I do anything." I hired a private investigator the following week, a woman named Terry, who came recommended through a colleague and who was professional and thorough, and sent me a report 2 weeks later with photographs and a full timeline. The other woman's name was Brianna Cole. She was 29, worked in marketing, lived in a nice apartment in Midtown that she was not paying for entirely on her own salary. She and Darnell had been seeing each other for 14 months. I looked at the report for a long time. Brianna Cole was not my problem. I want to be very precise about that. Some women in my situation would have wanted to confront her, call her, tell her what kind of man she was dealing with, warn her, curse her out, make her part of the story. I had no interest in any of that. She made her choices. Darnell made his. I was only responsible for mine. My first call after reading that report was to attorney Cynthia Boateng, who had handled 2 of my property acquisitions and who had a reputation for being the most prepared woman in any room she walked into. I told her I needed a divorce attorney. She said she had someone she trusted completely and she would make the call. My second call was to Jerome. I told him I was going to need some things restructured over the next few months, property related, legal, and clean, and I needed his discretion. Jerome said, "Done. Tell me what you need." I did not confront Darnell. I did not change my behavior at home in any visible way. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner twice that week. I slept on my side of the bed. Darnell had no idea. I spent the next 3 months preparing. I moved money I was legally entitled to move. I documented. I organized. I met with my attorney, whose name was Patricia Hale, a woman who spoke slowly and precisely and whose eyes missed nothing, and I laid out everything I had. She nodded through all of it, and at the end she said, "You have done most of my job for me." In February, 7 weeks before I served Darnell the papers, something else started happening that I had not planned for. My family started calling. Not my mother first, my cousin Priscilla first, and what I did next surprised even me. Priscilla called on a Wednesday evening in February. I saw her name on the screen and I sat with it for a moment. We had not spoken in 4 years. The last time we spoke, she had asked me to invest in a boutique she was opening with a friend, an investment that would have been $5,000 into a business plan I had read in 20 minutes and understood immediately would not work. I had said no politely. She had not spoken to me since. Now here she was on a Wednesday evening, and her name on my screen felt like the credit card statements, like a pattern I already understood. I did not answer. She left a voicemail. I listened to it once. Her voice was bright in the way voices get when someone is performing calm. She said she was reaching out because she had been thinking about family lately and felt like she and I had drifted and she missed me. She said she had a little situation she was navigating and she thought maybe we could talk. She said to call her back whenever. I did not call her back. 3 days later, Priscilla texted, then texted again, then called twice more. On the 4th day, she sent a long text explaining the situation, which was that she had co-signed a loan for her boutique partner 2 years earlier, and the partner had stopped paying, and the debt had come back to Priscilla, and she was in a difficult place, and she had heard that I was doing well, and she just needed someone to talk to. I read the text. I put the phone down. I went back to the property inspection report I had been reading before my phone buzzed. The week after Priscilla's calls, Uncle Terrence reached out. He called my mother's phone to get my number, which told me my mother had given it to him, which told me there had been a conversation between them about me that I had not been part of. Terrence left a voicemail that was warmer than anything he had ever said to me in person. He called me sweetheart. He said he was so proud of everything I had built, that he had always known I had it in me, that the family should have done better by me, and that he would love to have lunch and catch up, and also, he had a business opportunity he thought I might be interested in, a real estate play he was working on with some partners that needed a little seed investment from someone who understood the market. Sweetheart. He called me sweetheart. I thought about the parking lot in Charlotte. I thought about the laughter I had heard through the phone when my mother said, "Think of it as a little challenge." I wondered if Terrence had been one of the people laughing. I was fairly certain he had been. I did not call him back. The last one was my mother. She did not call at first. She showed up. I found out about it because my neighbor across the street, an older woman named Mrs. Patton, who noticed everything, rang my phone one afternoon to tell me there was a woman she did not recognize sitting on my porch steps. I was at the office. I asked Mrs. Patton to describe her, and she did, and I said thank you, and I stayed at the office for another 2 hours, and when I drove home, my mother was gone. She had left a note tucked into the door frame. It said, "Renee, I came to see you. Please call me. I am not doing well. Your mother." I took the note inside. I did not throw it away. I put it in a folder I had started keeping. A folder of evidence of what people do when they need something from you. Not evidence in a legal sense, evidence in a personal sense. The kind you keep so that later, when you start to soften, you can open the folder and remember what was real. 2 days after the note, she came back and rang the bell at 7:14 in the morning. I told you about that morning already. I told you about standing at the window with my cold coffee. But I did not tell you what I was thinking while I watched her. I was thinking about a Sunday in October with leaves the color of fire, and a bookstore, and a phone ringing, and laughter. I was thinking about a bus ticket that my best friend bought for me with her own money because my own mother had driven away. I was thinking about the 8 months I slept in a room with one window and a hot plate and studied at a table the size of a cutting board. I was thinking about every single day between that parking lot and this kitchen. Every single thing I built. And I was thinking that not one stone of any of it came from any of these people. My mother rang the bell 5 times that morning. Then she left. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee. I went to the window. The hydrangeas along the back fence were bare that time of year, but the structure of them was still there, those good strong branches holding their shape through the cold. I had planted them not knowing if they would grow. They grew. I thought that was a good thing to think about. Darnell found out about the divorce papers the way I planned for him to find out. He was served at home on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. by a process server while I was at my office across town. He called me 6 times in 20 minutes. I had expected this. I had talked through this exact sequence with Patricia Hale 2 weeks before it happened. She had said, "He will call. He will want to talk. You do not have to talk to him. That is what I am here for." I had nodded, and I had meant it. And when the calls came, I sat at my desk and I watched the phone ring, and I let it ring. On the 7th call, I picked up. I want to be honest with you about why I answered that one. It was not weakness. It was information gathering. I wanted to know where his head was. I wanted to know what he planned to say, because that would tell me what strategy he was planning for the proceedings. His voice when I answered was the voice of a man who had been caught completely off guard. He said my name. He said it twice. Then he said he thought we should talk, that he did not think it needed to come to this, that he thought if we just sat down together, we could work through it. I said, "Work through what, Darnell?" Long pause. He said he knew I had found out about Brianna. He said it had been a mistake, that it was over, that he had ended it 2 months ago, which I noted was a lie because Terry's last photograph was from 3 weeks before the papers were served. He said he was sorry. He said the words, "I am sorry," 4 times in the next minute, which in my experience means a person is measuring the words rather than feeling them. I said, "My attorney's name is Patricia Hale. Her office will be reaching out to yours. I think that is the right way to handle this." He said, "Renee, come on. We don't need attorneys." I said, "I do. Goodbye, Darnell." I hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment. Then I picked up my pen and went back to the property report I had been reading. He showed up at my office 4 days later. I knew he was coming because the front desk called back to tell me there was a man asking for me who did not have an appointment. I asked for a description. She gave it. I said, "Please tell him I am unavailable and give him this number." And I read her Patricia Hale's office number from the card I had kept on my desk for exactly this possibility. He stood in the lobby for 15 minutes. I know this because the front desk called back to update me. Then he left. I sent Patricia a message that evening, letting her know he had come by and that she should expect to hear from him or his attorney soon. She wrote back within the hour, "Good, we are ready." What I did not know yet, and found out the following week through a source I did not expect, was that things between Darnell and Brianna had already started to fall apart. Nadine told me, because Nadine had a colleague who knew someone in Brianna's office, and news moves in Atlanta the way it moves in any city where people know each other in overlapping circles. Apparently, once Darnell's income situation became clear, Brianna Cole had reconsidered her investment in the relationship. I found this out and I felt exactly one thing about it, which was nothing. It was not my business. She was not my concern. She had never been my concern. What I will tell you is this. I did not feel satisfied when I heard it. I know some people want me to say I felt satisfied. I did not. What I felt was tired, in a very specific way. The kind of tired that comes not from working hard, but from carrying something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. I felt the weight of 6 years of a marriage I had given my full self to, and I felt it leave. And what came after was not satisfaction. It was just space. Clean, quiet space. I drove home that evening and made dinner and called Nadine, and we talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with Darnell or Brianna or my family. We talked about a restaurant she had been to in Ponce City Market and a book I was reading and the hydrangeas, which I told her I was worried about because of the cold snap coming. She said hydrangeas were tougher than they looked. She was talking about the flowers. I know she was also talking about something else. You need to understand what I mean when I say I was prepared. I am not talking about prepared the way people are prepared when they are angry. Angry people prepare badly. They prepare to wound. They prepare to be witnessed. They want someone to see how much they have been wronged, and they build their case around that feeling. And feelings make poor architecture. I prepared the way I prepare a property acquisition. I gathered documentation. I organized everything chronologically. I understood, going in, exactly what I had brought into the marriage, what was mine before and remained mine by law, and what we had accumulated jointly and how it should be divided. I understood our prenuptial agreement, which we had signed, which Darnell had signed without much attention because he had trusted me and, at the time, I had trusted him. I had written it carefully. I had been careful about a lot of things. The first session with both attorneys lasted 2 hours. Patricia Hale sat across from Darnell's attorney, a man named Gerard, who wore a suit that was slightly too good for how little he had to work with, and she was precise and calm and prepared. Gerard asked 3 questions in the first 20 minutes that told me he was fishing. He did not know what Darnell had, because Darnell did not know what Darnell had. Darnell had been living well off a marriage to a woman who built things, and now he was in a conference room trying to figure out what of those things belonged to him. The answer, after prenuptial agreement and property records and financial documentation, was not much. He had a claim to the equity in our shared home, which we had bought together and which I had agreed from the start to split fairly. He had a claim to joint savings, which were real but not enormous. He had no claim on the investment properties which I had purchased before the marriage, or with separate funds I could document. He had no claim on the commercial properties, same reason. Gerard argued for additional compensation. Patricia asked him to show the basis for that argument. He tried 3 different angles over 2 sessions and none of them held. Patricia had an answer for each one that was ready before he finished the sentence. I sat beside her in that room and watched her work and thought, this is what it looks like when someone has done their job. By the 3rd session, Darnell had stopped coming to the meetings himself and was letting Gerard represent him alone. I thought that said something, though I was not sure what. Patricia said it meant he was embarrassed, or he had accepted the outcome, or both. Darnell sent me one text during this period. It said, "I hope you know I did love you." I believe he meant it. That was the part I had said was complicated. And here is where the complication lived. He probably did love me, in the way some people love things they also take for granted, in the way some people love comfort. That kind of love is real, and it is also not enough. And the end of a marriage can be both of those things at once. I did not write back. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March. The papers needed one more signature from me, which I would provide the following week. Everything was in order. The house was listed. My attorney had done exactly what she said she would do. Jerome had restructured what needed to be restructured. I had not lost a single investment property. I had not lost a single thing I had built with my own hands. What I lost was 6 years and a belief I had been trying to maintain. That was real. I do not want to sound like I walked through those months without feeling anything, because that would not be true. There were nights that were hard. There were mornings I sat in my car in the parking deck the way I used to in my 20s, not ready to go inside yet. There were moments in that conference room when I looked at the man across the table who used to dance with me in my kitchen, and I felt the specific grief of something that was real being over. I felt it. And then I did the next thing anyway. That was what the parking lot in Charlotte had taught me. Not toughness, exactly. Not the kind of toughness that means you don't feel things. The kind that means you feel things and you keep going. You sit on the bus with your book and you read every single page. The papers were in order. I was nearly through. There was one thing left I needed to do, and I needed to do it by myself. I wrote them on a Saturday in March, 1 week before my final signature on the divorce papers. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote a letter to each person who had knocked on my door or called my name in the past 2 months. My mother, my Uncle Terrence, my cousin Priscilla, Darnell. I want to tell you about these letters because they were the most honest writing I have ever done in my life, and also the most private. And the fact that no one will ever read them is exactly what made them possible. The letter to my mother was the longest. I wrote 4 pages. I wrote about Charlotte. I wrote about the note she left in my doorframe and what it felt like to read it. I wrote about the phone call in the parking lot, the laughter I heard in the background, the way she had said, "Think of it as a little challenge," with a lightness in her voice that told me she had not spent a single second wondering if I would be okay. I wrote about the bus. I wrote about the church annex room with one window. I wrote about every year between that parking lot and my kitchen table. Every year she had not been present for. Every year I had built without her. I wrote, toward the end of that letter, "The hardest part was not that you left me there. The hardest part was that you have never, in all the years since, said a single word about it that was not about what you needed me to understand or forgive. You have never once asked me what that night was like for me. You have never once been curious about me as a person. I was always just a role in your story. The difficult one, the quiet one, the useless one. I want you to know that I built a good life. I want you to know that I built it because of what you did, not in spite of it. Because what you did made it clear to me that no one was coming. And when you know no one is coming, you stop waiting and you start moving. I did not write, 'I forgive you.' I did not write it because it was not true yet, and I refuse to write things that are not true." The letter to Terrence was shorter, 2 pages. I wrote about the way he used to tell his long stories at the table while I sat at the end and wondered if I was even visible. I wrote about the way he called me sweetheart on the voicemail, a word he had never used for me in 37 years. I wrote, "You called me sweetheart because you needed something. I have been called worse things by people who also wanted things. At least they were honest about it." The letter to Priscilla was 1 page. I wrote about the video she had taken of me in that parking lot. Yes, I knew about the video. Nadine had seen it on a private family group chat she had been added to by accident years before. She had told me about it only last year, not wanting to hurt me, waiting until she thought I was solid enough to hold the information. I wrote, "You took a video of me standing alone in a parking lot with a dying phone, and you shared it. You thought it was funny. I need you to know that I saw it." I stopped there with Priscilla. There was nothing else that needed to be said. The letter to Darnell was 2 pages. I told him the things I had never said while we were married, the things I had filed and held. I told him about the credit card statements. I told him about Terry, the investigator, and the report she had given me. And I told him that I had read it once and then put it away because the details were not what mattered to me. What mattered to me was the pattern. I wrote, "You started treating what was mine as though it was ours, and you did it at the same time you were building something with someone else. I do not think you understood what you were doing. That is the honest truth. I do not think you sat down one day and decided to take from me. I think you just got comfortable. I think you stopped looking at me and started looking at what being with me gave you, and you did not notice when those two things became different things. I think you loved me in a way that was not enough. I loved you too. I want you to know that. I did. I wrote, I am not angry anymore. I was. I am not now. That was true. By the time I got to the end of his letter, I had moved through something and come out on the other side of it, and what was on the other side was not anger. It was a kind of clean sadness, the kind that does not ask for anything, does not need to be answered, just exists and then passes. I collected all 4 letters. I went to the backyard. I had a small fire pit I used in the fall when the evenings got cold enough to want one. I put the letters in it and I lit them. It was a Saturday in March and it was cold enough that I had my green coat on, the deep forest green one I love, and I stood there and watched those pages burn. I did not feel relieved exactly. I felt finished. That is different. Relief suggests you have been holding your breath. I had not been holding my breath. I had been breathing steadily and building and planning and moving forward, and now I was done with the last piece of looking backward. I went inside. I made tea. I called Nadine and I told her I had done the thing I needed to do. She did not ask what thing. She just said, "Good. You ready for Thursday?" Thursday was the day I would sign the final papers. I said I was ready. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I slept well. In the morning, the hydrangeas were still there along the fence, bare and strong in the cold, holding their shape and waiting for spring. The doorbell rang on a Thursday evening at 6:47 p.m., and this time I moved toward it without thinking twice. I knew before I opened the door. I had known since Nadine texted me at noon to say she would be there by 7. But even knowing, when I opened the door and she was standing there in a bright red coat with a bottle of champagne in one hand and a container of something that smelled like the pasta she made when things were worth celebrating, I felt something I had not felt in months. Something uncomplicated, something that had no weight attached to it. She said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Come inside." We sat at my kitchen table. Outside, the backyard was still cold and still bare, but there was something in the air that day that felt like it was thinking about changing. March in Atlanta does that. It threatens spring for weeks before it delivers, but it always delivers. Nadine poured the champagne before I signed anything. I raised an eyebrow at her, and she said, "We are celebrating the version of you that got here, not just the paper." That was the most Nadine thing she could have said, and it was exactly right. I told her about the letters. I had not told her the night I burned them, only that I had done something I needed to do. Now I told her the whole of it, what I had written to each person, what it had felt like to watch those pages go. She listened without interrupting, which was something she was very good at when she understood that interrupting would be the wrong thing. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The video thing. I should have told you sooner." I said, "You told me when you thought I could hold it. That was right." She said, "Were you angry when I told you?" I said, "Yes, for about 3 days. And then I wrote a page to Priscilla and burned it in my backyard on a Saturday. So." Nadine laughed. It was the kind of laugh that cuts through something heavy. The kind that means we have both survived something, and now we are on the other side of it. And the other side has champagne and pasta and a warm kitchen. We talked about my mother for a while. I told Nadine about the morning with the cold coffee and the window and my mother's gray coat that did not fit her right. Nadine asked me if I thought my mother understood yet that I was not going to open the door. I said, "I think she's starting to." My mother had called twice more after the Tuesday morning bell ringing. I had not answered. She had texted once, a message that was shorter than the door note. "Renee, please." I had read it and put the phone down. I had not blocked her. Blocking felt like a door slamming, like something with heat behind it, and I did not have heat behind it anymore. I just had a door. Closed. Calm. Not moving. I said to Nadine, I don't hate her. Nadine said, I know. I said, I just don't have anything to give her right now, and I'm not going to manufacture something I don't have. Nadine said, that's the sanest thing you've said in years. I picked up my pen. The papers from Patricia Hale's office were on the table in a neat folder. The last set. The ones that made everything official and permanent. Patricia had gone over every page with me the previous week. There was nothing in them I had not already understood. I had been ready to sign them for a while, really. The Thursday date was a formality. Everything real had already happened. But formalities matter. That was something I had learned in real estate and in life equally. The paperwork is how you make a thing real in the world outside your own head. You do the signing. You do the filing. You make the record. I signed my name on the last line. Renee Carter. Not Renee Carter Okafor. Not Renee Okafor. Just Renee Carter. The name I had chosen for myself when I left South Carolina at 22 with $1,100 in a duffel bag and a box of books. Nadine said, there it is. I set the pen down. Outside the window, the yard was getting dark. That particular Atlanta dusk that turns everything soft before the night settles in. The hydrangeas were shapes against the fence, strong and bare and patient. They had made it through winter. In a few weeks, those branches would start doing what they do, and by May they would be full of the blue I had loved since before I knew what kind of life I was building. I thought about that parking lot one more time. I let myself think about it completely, the whole picture. The way the October light hit the market, the bookstore window, the $10 book, the sound of my mother's voice on the phone, the laughter, the $2 in my jacket pocket, and the 14% battery, and the way the world had felt that day. Absolutely enormous and completely indifferent. I thought about Nadine picking up the phone without hesitation. I thought about the bus ride and reading every single page. I thought about every year after that, every hard year and good year, every property and every deal and every cold cup of coffee, and every morning I got up and did the next thing, even when I did not want to. And then I let the memory settle, the way something finally settles when you stop fighting it, and I felt it become the past. Not a wound, not a story I was still inside, just the past. Something that happened to a woman who no longer needed it to explain her. I raised my glass. Nadine raised hers. I said, to the useless one. She said it back, and we both knew what we meant, which was not the name they called me in Charlotte, was not my uncle's voice, or my mother's laughing phone call, or my cousin's video. What we meant was, to the woman who took that name and built something out of it that had nothing to do with them. To the woman who stood at the window on a Tuesday morning and did not open the door. To the woman who burned the letters and kept the hydrangeas. To the woman who signed the last paper and set down the pen and picked up the champagne. To that woman. To me. The papers would go to Patricia's office in the morning. Jerome had everything he needed to keep the properties moving. The Atlanta house was mine. The life in it was mine. Every square foot of it, every hydrangea, every cup of coffee I made in the morning in bare feet on cold tile, mine. The doorbell did not ring again that night. It did not need to.